Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character?
From the very moment this controversy began to unwind, there was a strange tension beneath every statement, every filing, every quiet whisper coming from behind the closed doors of Hollywood's most carefully controlled production rooms, and Blake Lively's objections. Those early sparks that would later ignite into a wildfire were handled with a mixture of urgency, fear, and a desperate attempt to keep the peace before everything exploded into the public spectacle it eventually became. Because, according to the filing, her concerns weren't ignored or brushed aside. They were addressed swiftly both before and during the filming hiatus, as if everyone involved already understood that even the smallest misunderstanding could turn into a storm if not handled with delicate hands. And although Justin Baldoni's team continues to dispute many parts of Blake's description of events, they insist one thing was always true. Everything she raised, every discomfort she expressed, was resolved the minute it surfaced, which made it all the more confusing when she later allowed the narrative to evolve into something far darker, far heavier than what anyone believed had happened on that set. The filing goes into careful detail, describing how Blake chose not to file any formal HR complaint even after she and her husband, Ryan Reynolds, chastised Baldoni for asking about her weight. A moment that Baldoni's side claims was immediately discussed, acknowledged, and then never repeated again, and if anything, it became one of those moments that lingered in the air like a misunderstood comment you wish you could erase from the timeline entirely, because it left a bruise without leaving a mark, a bruise that would later grow into something much bigger once the public got involved. When she objected to certain sex scenes in the script, Baldoni, who was both director and producer, and juggling 1,000 pressures at once, didn't fight her, didn't push back in the name of creative integrity, didn't invoke his authority. Instead, he revised them, softened them, or completely cut them out, adjusting the film to her comfort, trying to create a safe space that matched what she wanted, because everyone understood that if the star wasn't comfortable, the set wasn't functional, and no movie survives a fractured center. Then came June 1st, 2023, a date that the filing treats almost like a turning point. The early part of filming, the moment when Blake sat down with Baldoni and Jamie Heath to talk through everything she felt uneasy about, every moment that lingered in her mind, and both men apologized. Full stop, no excuses, no defensiveness, because the goal wasn't to prove who was right or wrong, but to restore the trust necessary to finish the film without tension simmering beneath the surface. And according to the filing after that meeting, she identified no further incidents, no new concerns, nothing she labeled as misconduct or harassment, nothing that would foreshadow the storm that would later erupt. And then came the 5-month strike, when filming stopped and Hollywood fell silent, and during that pause, her lawyer sent a list of requested protections for future filming. Not accusations, not demands for investigations, but a list of preferences, boundaries, and expectations for when production resumed, saying that a signed agreement would suffice in place of a formal HR process, while carefully adding that Blake still reserved her legal rights. A sentence that now reads differently in hindsight, as if it quietly hinted at future conflict even while projecting cooperation. The motion for summary judgment claims that these protections were largely duplicates of what was already in place, and some even address behaviors Blake herself had engaged in, improvising unscripted kissing, hugging cast members, making comments about appearances, things that were normal on a creative set, things everyone did, things that didn't signal discomfort until they were retroactively reframed. But then came January 4th, the infamous all-hands meeting in her apartment, the moment that so many people now describe as the emotional epicenter of the entire feud, and according to Baldoni's team, she read aloud a fresh list of grievances, stricter boundaries, unexpected restrictions on topics Baldoni could mention on set, and even a request for advance notice of COVID exposures, a list so controlling, so granular, that some people behind the scenes privately described it as excessive, even impossible, but they listened, they nodded, they took notes, they tried to meet her where she was, even if her demands seemed to tighten with each meeting. 2 weeks later, around January 19th, the team signed the protections she wanted in a forward-looking rider called the CRA. A document with no admission of wrongdoing, no validation of wrongdoing, simply a promise to move forward with sensitivity, and according to Baldoni's lawyers, everyone moved on, everyone agreed, everyone wanted peace, and nobody predicted that Blake would later portray this as evidence of something darker. And yet, beneath the surface, tension was already building, because people on set had started whispering that Blake wasn't just voicing concerns. She was controlling everything, reshaping the production through pressure, through influence, through the quiet power that comes from being a bankable star with a famous husband. And the day after her January 4th meeting, the private group chat of Baldoni's circle would explode with disbelief. But that part comes later, and right now all we know is that the seeds of conflict were already planted, misunderstood moments piling on top of each other, one misunderstanding feeding the next, and the whole situation becoming a fragile glass tower ready to shatter with the slightest push. And that push came quietly, subtly, almost invisibly, in private conversations and shifting attitudes that nobody fully noticed until it was too late. Because while the public would later see this feud as a sudden explosion, the people closest to it knew it was more like slow poison, spreading quietly through text threads, whispered frustrations, and the uncomfortable feeling that the harmony of the set had been replaced by a strange performance of niceness, where everyone smiled but nobody breathed naturally anymore. And the irony was that Baldoni himself kept insisting to everyone that they treat Blake with patience, with care, with understanding, because he believed that whatever tension existed could be smoothed out with empathy, not confrontation, and he didn't want to be the man who clashed with a woman who already felt unheard in previous professional environments. So he tried harder, softened himself further, took blame in moments where he wasn't even sure blame was his to take, while the rest of the team watched the dynamic shift into something lopsided, something uneasy, something where the director seemed to be walking on a tightrope while Blake stood firmly on solid ground dictating the balance. And then came the moment the filing describes as the emotional breaking point, when on January 3rd, just one day before that apartment meeting, Baldoni vented to his inner circle in the infamous group chat, describing Blake's behavior as emotionally erratic and extreme, words he later regretted, words taken from a moment of frustration that would eventually be pulled into a courtroom like a weapon, but at the time, to him it was just a private moment of overwhelmed honesty shared with people who had seen the struggle firsthand, people who had watched him accommodate again and again while trying not to disrupt the peace. But the significance of this chat wouldn't become clear until much later. Not until Blake's legal team used those exact messages to paint Baldoni as someone who had been secretly belittling her, secretly disrespecting her, secretly positioning her as unstable, even though the full context, according to Baldoni's lawyers, was that he was simply exhausted, blindsided, and trying to make sense of a situation where the rules kept changing and the expectations kept tightening. Meanwhile, Blake's team began preparing their counter-narrative, framing her as the woman fighting for respect on a set where she felt emotionally unsafe, a woman whose boundaries were not just ignored but minimized. And while both sides claim they tried to move forward professionally, it was becoming clear that they were no longer working on the same movie. They were working inside two different realities, each shaped by emotion, pressure, and unspoken resentment. Filming resumed in February, but nothing was the same. The energy felt thick, the silences felt sharp, and according to people on set, Blake's presence seemed heavier than before, more watchful, more commanding, and Baldoni increasingly became cautious to the point of paralysis, constantly checking himself, second-guessing every directive, every comment, every moment where he needed to communicate with her, because the fear of being misunderstood had grown into a shadow that followed him across the set. And then came February 27th, the day the filing describes as the beginning of the irreversible collapse, when Blake elevated her concerns into formal allegations that blindsided Baldoni and the entire production team. Allegations that went far beyond discomfort and into territory that suggested emotional harm, professional misconduct, and a failure of leadership so severe that it threw the entire project into chaos. And Baldoni's lawyers say it felt like the ground fell out from beneath them, because for months they were led to believe everything had been resolved, everything was on track, everything was understood, and suddenly they were faced with a narrative that made them look like villains in a story they didn't even know they were part of. What made it worse is that the timing, according to their side, aligned suspiciously with financial negotiations, rewritten creative control discussions, and a rising sense that Blake and Ryan wanted much more influence over the production than originally agreed upon. And there were whispers, quiet but steady, that the allegations were being used as leverage, as pressure, as a way to secure authority over not just the film but the entire narrative surrounding its creation. Whether or not that's true remains the core question of the lawsuit, but what is undeniable is that both sides felt betrayed. Blake felt unseen, unheard, and mistreated, while Baldoni felt ambushed, misrepresented, and emotionally gutted by the accusations that came after months of apologies, adjustments, and bending himself to meet her needs. And as all of this played out behind the scenes, a second storm was brewing. One far deadlier to reputations than anything happening on set. The public perception war, where silence becomes suspicion and every legal line becomes a headline. The fallout from the ongoing Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni controversy reached a new peak as legal filings, private messages, and insider accounts began to paint a far more complex picture than the public had seen, revealing a collision of celebrity influence, personal grievances, and the machinery of Hollywood itself. As Baldoni's legal team fired back, it became clear that what had been presented as isolated complaints from Lively were, according to court documents, largely addressed during the filming hiatus and resolved through direct discussions with the parties involved. Yet the media narrative had turned them into a larger scandal, sparking endless speculation. The filings meticulously outlined that Lively's objections, ranging from issues with certain scenes, comments about her appearance, to physical interactions on set, were reviewed in real time, with Baldoni revising or removing content as requested, and that no incidents persisted after the initial resolutions. Yet months later, additional requests were framed as legal protections for future filming, which, according to the motion for summary judgment, largely mirrored measures already agreed upon and implemented. The documents revealed a meeting on January 4, 2024, in Lively's apartment, where she read aloud grievances including limits on topics Baldoni could discuss on set and notifications regarding COVID exposures. A move which insiders described as controlling and excessive given prior resolutions, and this meeting became a pivotal moment that set the tone for how the legal team would characterize the unfolding dispute. Meanwhile, private messages from Baldoni, shared as evidence in filings, offered a window into his personal turmoil, detailing a night he described as an ambush where he was asked to apologize for alleged missteps he insisted were taken out of context, leaving him emotionally paralyzed and struggling to reconcile the confrontation with his understanding of the events. The messages, including support from friends and colleagues like Andy Grammer and Rainn Wilson, illustrated the intense personal impact of the situation, the mixture of pressure, confusion, and betrayal, and the way the conflict had ripple effects across relationships on and off set, highlighting the human cost behind Hollywood's glamorous veneer. Beyond the personal dimension, the filings argued that after filming wrapped, Lively leveraged her celebrity influence to secure control over edits, credits, and promotional decisions, while creating negative press for Baldoni, unfollowing him on social media, and limiting his participation in marketing efforts, a pattern the legal team presented as evidence of strategic manipulation to shape public perception. In response, Baldoni's team engaged crisis PR experts and monitored online activity, ensuring the film's release would not be overshadowed by controversy while documenting interactions that could serve as evidence of Lively's conduct, emphasizing the way celebrity conflicts often play out in both public arenas and meticulously recorded private communications. As the narrative unfolded, the story became not just about the specific claims but about the broader machinery of Hollywood. How complaints are raised, how power dynamics shape resolutions, and how public perception can be orchestrated or distorted. Each motion, text, and PR strategy fed into a larger story of control, image, and influence, demonstrating how disputes between high-profile figures intersect with media strategy, legal maneuvering, and the human emotions.